In October 1943, every B-17 crew member understood the brutal mathematics of survival. They knew rumors circulated of an 8% tour survival rate, close to the actual attrition that was destroying the 8th Air Force. By the time a crew flew 25 missions, the length of a combat tour, the math said they'd already be dead. On October 14, 1943, 2,910 American airmen climbed into their flying fortresses for another roll of the dice. What they didn't know was that today, the House had rigged the game. The cold mathematics of war had become a stark reality for the 2,910 airmen of the USAAF's 8th Air Force as they prepared their B-17 flying fortresses for the mission over Germany on October 14, 1943. By this stage of World War II, statisticians had painted a grim picture. Rumors circulated of an 8% tour survival rate, close to the actual attrition. Each mission carried brutal loss rates. On deeper penetrations into enemy territory, these figures soared beyond acceptable limits. The numbers were brutal, yet indispensable, transforming military strategy from mere tactics to calculated risks. On that day, however, the odds were even less in their favor. German defenses had learned. They had adapted. They were ready. The reality of these odds had not fully dawned on USAAF leadership initially. The strategic bombing campaign began with an optimistic belief in the self-defending capability of bomber formations. Planes bristled with machine guns. They flew in tight formations for mutual support. This theoretical shield, however, crumbled under the actual pressures of combat. The skies over Europe were far more hostile than calculations had presumed. Every mission proved it. Every empty bunk that night confirmed it. Still, the missions continued. Despite these harrowing statistics, the resolve of the airmen remained unwavering. Every airman understood the stakes. One crewman recorded in his diary, "Every time we took off, there was a silent acknowledgement that some of us wouldn't return. But you had to put the odds out of your mind and focus on the task." This stoic acceptance of the odds was a testament to the crew's bravery and determination. It was the human element amidst the cold calculations. Men knew they were flying toward probable death. They climbed aboard anyway. October 14th brought no reprieve. As the morning broke over England, the mission's scale was immense. A formation of 291 B-17s readied themselves. Each bomber carried 10 crew members. That meant 2,910 men preparing for what many suspected would be their last flight. The airmen, well aware of the statistics, knew too well which positions within their flying fortress bore the highest mortality rates. Tail gunners died first. Ball turret gunners couldn't escape. Waist gunners froze before they burned. The heavy losses sustained by these positions in previous missions had only solidified their grim reputations. The role of mathematicians in shaping these missions was now undeniable. They had become critical in planning and executing sorties. Their calculations influenced everything: the number of aircraft in a formation, the altitudes at which they flew, the routes they took. Theories of probability and statistical models were no longer abstract concepts. They were tools that could estimate the human cost of each raid. Their input had strategic implications. More importantly, they had moral ones. Commanders wrestled with the knowledge that each decision meant specific men would die. The morning of October 14th saw men writing what many knew would be final letters home. "If you're reading this," one airman wrote, "know that I did my duty." Another simply wrote, "Tell Mom I wasn't afraid." These fragments capture the grim acceptance these men faced. They married cold, hard data with the stark human experience of aerial combat. As these 291 flying fortresses assembled over England that morning, each of the 2,910 men aboard was acutely aware of their position within the aircraft. More critically, they understood which position was most likely to result in their deaths. Ball turret gunners knew they flew in glass coffins. Tail gunners understood they were bait. Pilots knew they'd be the last to leave, if at all. This was the new reality of high-altitude warfare, dictated by numbers and endured by men. In the cramped, icy confines of the B-17 Flying Fortress, 10 men faced uniquely terrifying risks. Perhaps none of these roles was more perilous than that of the ball turret gunner. Enclosed in a plexiglass sphere, the turret gunner operated with no parachute. His body was compressed into the small space like a fetus. During raids, these men felt every flak burst. The glass around them cracked. Metal fragments pierced through. Any direct hit meant instant death. No escape possible. The Sperry ball turret provided crucial underbelly defense, but it made escape impossible if the aircraft was hit. Many ball turret gunners died trapped in their spheres as their B-17s fell from the sky. Towards the B-17's tail, the tail gunner was equally exposed. German fighters attacked from behind. They knew to kill the tail gunner first. Once he was gone, they could attack with impunity. These men understood their role. They were the first line of defense and the first to die. One crewman noted in his post-mission report, "The sky was thick with Messerschmitts. I kept firing, knowing full well each burst of their guns was meant for me." German pilots had perfected this strategy. Eliminate the tail gunner. Therefore, subsequent attack runs became safer for them. The waist gunners grappled with their own set of dangers. They stood at open windows in temperatures reaching -40 degrees. Only thin metal separated them from enemy bullets. Frostbite claimed fingers before flak claimed lives. More than half suffered cold injuries. Their guns jammed from ice. Their hands went numb. One waist gunner later recalled, "You never got used to the cold. You could feel your fingers going numb, and each trigger pull was a test of willpower." The open windows necessary for their .50 caliber machine guns invited death in multiple forms. Each crew member's role was critical. The navigator plotted the course through flak and fighters. The bombardier lined up the target while flak exploded around the nose. The pilot and co-pilot wrestled with controls as engines failed and wings burned. The radio operator sent position reports while manning a gun. The engineer managed failing systems while fighting from the top turret. Every position meant a different kind of probable death. Statistical analysis showed ball turret gunners suffered the highest casualty rates, nearly double that of pilots. Tail gunners came second, waist gunners third, but on missions like October 14th, position hardly mattered. The mathematics of destruction would claim them all equally. At 10:10 a.m., as these men crossed into German airspace, their fighter escort turned back. The P-47 Thunderbolts had reached their maximum range. They waggled their wings, a goodbye that meant, "You're on your own now." What followed was 5 hours of carefully orchestrated slaughter. Each crew member now faced the full weight of the German defense. The statistics they'd memorized became reality. The German Luftwaffe had perfected the art of bomber destruction by 1943. Their strategy was methodical, mathematical, and merciless. The Luftwaffe assembled its fighters at predetermined points. They attacked in coordinated waves designed to overwhelm the bombers' defenses. German pilots had perfected the company front assault. 12 fighters would barrel toward the bombers head-on. The closing speed exceeded 500 miles per hour. Gunners had seconds to react. Therefore, most couldn't. The Focke-Wulf FW-190 was built to kill bombers. Its 30mm cannons could tear through aluminum like paper. Just 3 or 4 hits could destroy a flying fortress. The bomber would break apart in seconds. Fuel tanks exploded, wings folded, men fell without parachutes. One American crewman observed, "When you saw those FW-19s coming straight at you, you knew not all of us would make it back. It was like staring down the barrel of a massive shotgun." German technology enhanced their lethality. Radar installations across the Reich provided early warning. Fighter controllers vectored their pilots to perfect intercept points. This network of detection and response was pivotal. German fighters knew exactly where to find the bombers. They knew when they'd arrive. They knew their altitude, their heading, their vulnerabilities. The ground-based flak batteries created walls of steel in the sky. These 88mm guns reached B-17 altitudes easily. They fired box barrages, predetermined patterns that filled cubic miles of airspace with shrapnel. One bombardier recalled, "Flying into flak was like flying into hell. You could hear the metal tearing, smell the cordite, see the flashes all around you. Every second felt like an eternity." The flak was aimed not at individual planes, but at space itself. Bombers had to fly through it. There was no evasion possible. German pilots employed multiple attack patterns. Some dove from above at high speed. Others attacked from below where bomber defenses were weakest. The most experienced pilots saved ammunition until point-blank range. They couldn't miss. They wouldn't waste bullets. Every cannon round was placed precisely. These missions gradually degraded the Nazi war effort, but the toll on crews was unimaginable. Each raid left psychological scars on survivors. Men aged years and hours. They returned as different people, if they returned at all. Every face was gaunt, one crewman noted. We were old men in young men's bodies, aged by what we had seen and done. For 5 hours, the American bombers flew through this aerial meat grinder. German fighters attacked. They landed. They refueled. They attacked again. And then, finally, through the smoke and flame and death, the scarred industrial landscape of Schweinfurt appeared below. On October 14, 1943, the 8th Air Force had to destroy the ball-bearing factories in Schweinfurt. These factories produced components vital to every German tank, plane, and submarine. Destroying them could shorten the war, but the bombing run required B-17s to fly straight and level for 8 minutes. No evasion, no maneuvering. Just hold steady while every German gun tried to kill you. As the formations approached Schweinfurt, the sky erupted. German gunners had calculated exactly where the bombers would fly. They created box barrages, walls of exploding steel at precise altitudes. The bombers had to fly through these walls. There was no other way to reach the target. One pilot described the scene. It was like flying into the gates of hell. Shells burst all around us, and the aircraft shook violently with each near miss. The casualty rate during these 8 minutes defied comprehension. 60 B-17s were destroyed. That meant one bomber falling every 12 seconds. Men watched their friends' planes disintegrate. Wings broke off. Fuselages split open. Bodies fell from torn aircraft. Parachutes bloomed, but not enough. Never enough. One tail gunner recorded, "The sky was littered with parachutes as men bailed out of burning aircraft." It was a relentless, horrifying sight. Gunners kept firing even as their own planes burned. During those 8 minutes, crews faced impossible choices. Stay with the burning aircraft to release bombs? Bail out and let the mission fail? Pilots held steady while engines burned. Bombardiers stayed at their sites while flak tore through the nose. These 8 minutes demanded everything. For bombers that survived the initial run, the ordeal wasn't over. They'd dropped their bombs on Schweinfurt. The factories below burned, but now they had to get home. Half their friends were gone. Their aircraft were riddled with holes. Engines failed. Hydraulics leaked. Controls barely responded. One flight engineer noted, "We dropped our bombs, and then it was all about getting home." But looking around, half the guys who came with us weren't there anymore. German fighters had landed during the bomb run. They'd refueled. They'd rearmed. Now they climbed to intercept the battered bomber stream heading home. The Luftwaffe understood wounded bombers couldn't defend themselves. Stragglers made easy targets. German pilots pursued them relentlessly. They followed them to the French coast. They showed no mercy. Those who made it back to England brought aircraft that shouldn't fly. Holes large enough to walk through. Control cables held by single strands. Blood frozen to the floors and walls. Ground crews wept as they counted the missing. The mission had delivered a blow to German industry, but at a devastating cost. The raw courage of the B-17 crews would be remembered as one of the most ferocious aerial battles of World War II. The mission proved that strategic bombing required fighter escort. Without it, courage alone meant nothing against mathematics. As B-17 bombers turned toward England, their ordeal continued. German fighters exploited every weakness. Damaged bombers fell behind the formation. They became easy prey. One pilot described the horror. Every ounce of energy and focus was directed at keeping her in the air, each minute stretching into eternity as we dodged one attack after another. Aircraft with failing engines couldn't keep up. Therefore, German fighters picked them off methodically. German pilots had perfected the art of killing stragglers. They approached from blind spots. They targeted damaged engines. They aimed for wounded gunners who couldn't return fire. It was systematic slaughter. As the mauled formations crossed into Allied territory, they still weren't safe. 5 bombers crashed upon landing. Their structures had been too damaged to survive touchdown. Landing gear collapsed, wings folded, fuselages broke apart on the runway. 7 more aircraft were written off as unsalvageable. They'd made it home, but they'd never fly again. Ground crews counted empty hard stands where bombers should have parked. Mechanics found blood frozen in gun positions. They found letters half-written. They found photographs of families who would receive telegrams. The mathematics of loss was written in empty spaces. The vulnerability of daylight precision bombing without fighter cover was now undeniable. Over 600 airmen were killed or missing. The loss rate was 20%, 1 in 5. These numbers forced a strategic reckoning. One statistician noted, "Our losses today underscore the unsustainable nature of these unescorted missions. We are essentially sending our men into a well-orchestrated massacre." This realization led to immediate changes. The 8th Air Force suspended deep penetration raids. They wouldn't resume until long-range fighter escorts arrived. The P-51 Mustang would eventually change everything, but that was months away. For now, the bombing campaign essentially stopped. The sacrifice of 600 men had finally forced leadership to acknowledge what the mathematics had always shown. Military leadership would later acknowledge the obvious truth. Bombers needed fighters. Without them, strategic bombing was simply organized suicide. The mathematics didn't lie. Men did. The empty hard stands that night told the story. Where 291 bombers had departed, only 231 returned. Of those, 138 had major damage. The mathematics was simple and brutal. Daylight bombing without escort fighters equaled death. The tragedy of Black Thursday wasn't just the loss of over 600 men. It was that their sacrifice proved what mathematics had already demonstrated. The events of October 14, 1943, marked the absolute failure of the self-defending bomber doctrine. With over 600 airmen missing or captured, the emotional and strategic toll was devastating. The 20% loss rate, the highest of any major mission, finally forced change. Behind closed doors, American commanders faced the truth. They'd been sending men to die for a flawed theory. The doctrine of self-defending bombers was fantasy. Mathematics had proved it. Now, 600 empty bunks proved it again. The strategic bombing campaign paused. For months, deep penetration raids stopped. This hiatus allowed the introduction of the P-51 Mustang with drop tanks. These fighters could escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. They changed everything. Loss rates plummeted. Missions became survivable, but it had taken 600 lives to learn this lesson. First-hand accounts from surviving crew members captured the mission's horror. One tail gunner wrote, "The sky was thick with flak, and fighters hit us from every direction." Knowing half of us wouldn't make it back wasn't just a statistic, it was a reality we lived. These men understood they were expendable. Their lives were worth less than the doctrine they were testing. The implications rippled throughout the air war. Bombing accuracy improved with fighter protection. Crew morale recovered. The Luftwaffe, forced to defend against escorts, began losing pilots it couldn't replace. The air war shifted decisively, but only after October 14th forced the change. Some bombers limped home on one engine. Others flew with dead crew members still at their guns. These stories became legend, but they masked the fundamental failure that caused such losses. The strategic shift was immediate and dramatic. New tactics emerged. Fighter escorts became mandatory. Target selection changed. The focus shifted to destroying the Luftwaffe itself before attempting to destroy German industry. First, win air superiority, then bomb at will. When bombing resumed with fighter escorts, losses dropped to acceptable levels. The same targets that had cost 20% losses now cost 2%. The mathematics had changed because the tactics had changed. Black Thursday transformed American air strategy forever. The catastrophe proved that technology and tactics, not courage, determined survival. The sacrifice of over 600 men finally forced this recognition. On October 14, 1943, the human cost became undeniable. Young men, averaging just 22 years old, faced not only German fighters, but the certainty of mathematics. The rumors of an 8% survival rate weren't just numbers anymore. They were friends who didn't return. They were empty bunks. They were letters never sent home. The psychological toll was immediate. Men broke down. Some refused to fly. Flak happy became a common diagnosis. Psychiatrists reported unprecedented cases of combat fatigue. The mathematics of death had broken minds as surely as German fighters had broken bodies. Those shot down and captured faced years in German camps. They were the lucky ones. At least they were alive. Their war was over. They would survive. Most who flew that day would not. These personal stories underscore the statistical reality. The survival rate was lived experience, not abstract theory. Each mission meant watching friends die. Each landing meant counting who was missing. Men aged rapidly under this strain. They couldn't sustain such losses psychologically or numerically. Black Thursday exposed more than tactical failure. It revealed the human cost of mathematical denial. Leaders had ignored the numbers. They'd believed in theories over evidence. Therefore, 600 men paid the price for this delusion. Military doctrine changed forever. Never again would American planners ignore mathematics for ideology. Statistics became paramount. Human costs were calculated honestly. The lesson was expensive but permanent. In the end, Black Thursday's lesson was simple. Mathematics doesn't care about courage. Probability doesn't yield to patriotism. When you send men on statistically impossible missions, statistics win. Over 600 American airmen proved this truth with their lives. Today, when we talk about acceptable losses and calculated risks, we should remember October 14, 1943. That was the day 2,910 Americans flew into German airspace knowing the mathematics were against them. Over 600 never returned. They didn't die for glory or country. They died for a flawed doctrine that ignored mathematical reality. Their sacrifice finally forced their leaders to change the equation. Military planning learned to respect probability. Fighter escorts became mandatory. The self-defending bomber myth died with those 600 men. Their loss transformed aerial warfare, but the price was unconscionable. Mathematics had warned them. Leaders hadn't listened. Men died for that failure. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe for more fascinating historical deep dives every week. Thanks for watching.